My name is Vanessa Hanschke, and I am presenting my summer project entitled Understanding and Influencing Responsible Innovation in Data Science Teams. My supervisor is Dr. Paul Marshall. And to give you a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about today, so I'll first talk about the problem that some of you might have heard in the in progress, but I'll go over that for the people who haven't heard that in the in progress presentation. Then I'll talk to you about my methodology, what I did, which was ethnography and design fictions. I will then present to you the 3 design fiction memos that I created in my summer project. And as a last section, I entitled it "So What?" Like, why would we do ethnographies and design fictions for responsible AI, and what other things can we do with it in the future? So the kind of motivation of my project is well expressed in a paper by Crawford and Kalo called "There is a Blind Spot in AI Research," and what they're kind of commenting on, it's from 2016, is that there's a lot of discussion of fully autonomized systems and AI singularity. What will that do to us in the future? But then what is kind of being ignored is the algorithms which are affecting society right now in the industry and looking at how we can manage those. But since 2016, there have been a lot of different developments and methods in explainability and fairness. What we maybe don't know so much is how well these things work in practice. And so what I am looking at in particular is the role of the data scientist, who is kind of like in the beginning of generating an algorithm industry and sits at the center of many different constraints. So algorithmic accuracy, explainability, different ethical frameworks they have to incorporate, their data quality. And I try to answer some questions by studying a data science team who was working inside a company in the financial sector. And so I had access to this team and studied them using 2 main methods, ethnography and design fiction. So just for those who are not so familiar with ethnographies, they're originally from anthropology. And what you do is you kind of immerse yourself in a culture. So in my case, it was a work culture. And you learn what people do, how they do, why they do it, just by observing and engaging with people at their workplace. And so I did that in this data science team. I did their onboarding training. I attended different team meetings, joined some task forces, looked at some procedural work meetings. And then I did semi-structured interviews with 8 members of the data science team. And concentrated my questions especially on explainability, fairness, and ethical frameworks. And so the second method that I applied was design fictions, which is a narrative tool to kind of imagine design futures by using different, it can have different forms. So for example, stories or speculative probes or films. And by creating these stories, we can kind of explore potential impacts of, for example, disruptive technologies. So there's some examples in the slide that I won't have time to go into, but one thing that you can think of is like Black Mirror type of dystopian scenario, or maybe even utopian scenario. And how did I put these things together, my ethnography and design fiction? I based my summer project on work from Wong, who brought out this Kai paper in 2021 called on design fiction memos. And so what was done by Wong was that in his ethnography qualitative analysis, as he was looking at the data, he was also writing little memos of of kind of design fictions, little stories side by side, to go into more depth of this data, to use it as a communicative tool, and to kind of explore the different values of different stakeholders. So in his case, it was UX professionals. And now I'll show you 3 design fictions, memos that I came up with in my summer project. So this is the first one. I called it Individual Fairness Intellisense. And this was an idea I had at the very beginning. So it was kind of more used to frame my questions. And so the idea is, as like most code annotation tools, you would have one that underlined things in your code, and then highlight bad outcomes for fairness. So instead of saying like, oh, you probably missed an apostrophe here, it would say something like, oh, this line will make 600 people homeless. And this idea kind of came to me by thinking, well, writing code is kind of very private, and each line can have an impact. And how does that work for a data scientist? However, when I then collected my data and then I re-referred to this memo, I understood that this individual idea was not as important as I thought, because the way that in this data science team they operated was they had lots of checklists and checkpoints where issues are caught very early on in the process. So there's less focus on the individual, but more on collaboration. The second one kind of came about in a theme in my questionnaires that was trust and customer care. So the data scientists cared very much about their customers. It was like a big value. And I kind of combined this idea with a recent study, with a study that was on Twitter data. So this they were asking participants how they felt about their tweets being used in research. And in this, the participants were often very surprised. What? My tweets are being used in research? Is that even allowed? But obviously it's written really small in terms and conditions, and nobody really knows. So I was kind of combining this. Well, what if you asked the customers, how do you feel about your data being used for machine learning algorithms? They might say as well, what? My data is being used, because they've never like looked into their terms and conditions. And so I kind of also designed a little email communication, imagined how that would look like, and thought that, well, probably the data scientists would object saying these customers, they don't really understand what we're doing with their data, and imagined a discussion between a data science manager and customer engagement manager that could come out of this. The other problem that I thought could come out of this was that there's a thing in GDPR that is a request for explanation. So if a decision is made using an algorithm, you can request an explanation how this is made. There's been research looking into that the way that it's formulated, a request for explanation, is not very clearly defined. So what is a good explanation? What is a sufficient explanation? But then not many people know about this, so there's not many people asking for requests for explanations. And I guess so it's difficult to know if suddenly, for example, due to a user survey, there was an influx of explanations with different people asking different things. Could that like disrupt the system? And okay, thank you. And then my last one, kind of leading on also from this explanation topic, is the idea that the theme that came up in my interviews, which was that data scientists see being able to explain as a very important part of their job. So they think that they need to be able to explain machine learning to everyone as their role. And I was like, oh, well, so this is a soft skill, And I was wondering, well, how could you kind of train this soft skill? Because you need to always adapt your explanations to different people. And I imagined kind of chatbots with different personalities. So imagine you had a statistician personality who was very precise on their statistics and understood that, or someone who's a complete AI novice and doesn't know anything about machine learning. Maybe a digital native who has a bit of idea of what how data can be used, and also someone who's like a complete skeptic. Robots are going to take over the world. Don't take my data. And imagine having chatbots, which data scientists could use to train to practice explaining. So yeah, my last, moving on to the last part to kind of wrap up. So what did I learn from this summer project? And so the ethnography, while other studies looking into fairness and explainability and all these issues often do cross-industry interviews, my study was looking at responsible AI in a very particular context and practice. And I was watching how the values were implemented in their work and how far the industry has come. And I didn't get to talk all about my findings due to like timing and IP issues, but I thought one of the most important things was that I saw how different stakeholders interact, and that actually collaboration and interacting with regulators was a really key element in how they design, which is something I only gained by integrating myself into the team. Although I would say that my kind of mini ethnography only gave me a little peek into what they do. So if anything, it was only like a small start. The design fiction memos, I think they helped me reflect on some of the assumptions I had. For example, the first design fiction memo. And I would say that they're very appropriate for the topic of values because they force you to empathize with all the different stakeholders and think about their positions. However, some of the themes that I found did not really fit into any narratives. So I was thinking some of the themes when I was analyzing my data, they would have made very boring stories or artifacts. So I was wondering if I was introducing some kind of narrative bias where I was only concentrating on the themes that maybe could have made some interesting design fiction. So I would say they don't work for everything. And but it was using just the memoing tool was quite useful for me to test the tool of design fictions and to brainstorm on how my PhD could kind of look like in the future. And yeah, so this summer project could have many different directions in the future work. So I could look at different stakeholders, so also call handlers or end users, but probably most importantly, I could feed back the design memos and verify my assumptions with the data science teams. And great. And I could also look at the data science ethics through the lens of a certain ethical theory. Yeah, so I can conclude a few seconds early and yeah, answer some questions.
Okay, thank you. I have a question, if I may. So,
sure.
Regarding your second design fiction, where you kind of did user surveys, it always strikes me that, I mean, if I was asked such a question, I wouldn't know how to answer it if I didn't know what potential benefits would you have. Right? So should that be included in user surveys like this? So
yeah.
Well, how would you feel about if your one provider would use it in the following way, which potentially would have these kind of benefits?
Yeah. So the question was that if with these kinds of surveys, it would be useful to have a more detailed explanation on how this machine learning algorithm is applied and what kind of impact it would have. So I think that, so this was kind of the question that this survey was also asking, that inside a survey, you can't really ask, you can't really go into detail of explaining. So I kind of had this in the email as well, where they're saying I was sure if we should give in more explanations around what machine learning is before sending out the survey. So I think it kind of shows also the power imbalance that a data scientist has, which is natural because they're a specialist in their knowledge and they know everything, but you can't explain and you need to, if you explain, you get to choose what to explain, but if you want to make a survey, you also need to make it snappy enough so that people answer. And so just the confusion around the consent, which I also thought about inside this Twitter research ethics study, where I was reading it and I was thinking, oh, well, I've done NLP on like Twitter data, and I would never worry because I'm not read. If you're just extracting the nouns or something like that, that's nothing. But how do you explain that to someone who's, when you're asking a survey, like you kind of need to give a really long consent form. So I think that kind of confusion around how much information do you give for it to be real consent is, so it's a thing that kind of asks that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
I have a couple of points. So I think just to add here, I think we could think about immersive surveys. So instead of saying how you would feel about data being used by an algorithm, I would be very uncomfortable. But if you say, if these are the things that is being done with your data, how would you feel about that? Probably immersive surveys here. Coming to my questions, I had one question on design fiction. One is spoke about values. So are you thinking about specific value theory, any specific value theory you would use, or just general values?
So in my...
Could you repeat the question?
Oh, sorry. The question was about values, if I was using any specific value theory. And so I kind of, when I did my semi-structured interviews, I kind of left it a bit open to see what the participants would say in values. So I did have some sort of examples inside for my questionnaire based on like Batya Friedman's work in value-sensitive design, but I kind of left the question open to the participants. So they very often gave values such as customer focus, which is maybe not like a general ethical value, but which was like the thing that was important inside the company. So I would say with all of my questions, even things like fairness or ethics, which also have different definitions and different ways of interpreting. I kind of left it open in the ethnography to see what they would answer and what they would kind of take for granted as these words to mean. So was fairness to them just making sure that there was balanced data, or did they think as far about the impact of individual customers that they had to correct or things like that? Yeah.
I have another slightly general question.
Great question. Are there any other questions? Yeah, let's move to
Sorry.
So we can take it offline. There's lunch happening.
You mentioned that the ethnography was done with a data science team in the finance sector. You sort of anticipated there would be different attitudes and different like check-in points in a different sector like social media or something like that, where the ethical issues are more evident is the way.
So
What was the question?
oh, sorry. And the question was, do I anticipate, because my study was very focused on a specific sector, if I anticipate the answers would be different in a different sector. I think very much so, because I saw a lot of influence of the sector inside the work. So I would expect any other sector to have that influence. And I think that would be also interesting in like future work to see how much these sectors are influencing their specific AI applications. And I think, sometimes, if it's for the better or for the worse, because in one way they'll learn from their sector, and another way, maybe they'll inherit practices which people should get rid of in the first place, like, I'm sure too old and outdated.